have two speakers today. We have Jennie and Rubin Peacock. And Jennie works with Rubin as gallery manager and publicist. She is a former arts journalist and dance critic for the Times-Dispatch and Style magazine. She is a docent at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. Art is one passion, preservation is the other. After a career in historic preservation at Historic Richmond Foundation and the Alliance to Conserve Old Richmond Neighborhoods, and being named Richmonder of the Year in 2005 for her preservation advocacy, she joined Virginia Properties, where she specializes in the sale of vintage properties. And our other speaker today, whoops, that's a fail. It's off. What happened?
I love it.
I broke it.
I love it.
It's on.
Talk loud.
You can never plan ahead.
Oh,
It'll be 5 hours.
we're going to wait
early.
for the microphone. You need to hear about.
But it was a nice break. It was just like perfect.
Yeah. It was well timed. Sorry about this. Technical.
So your son who was speaking for you?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yes. Thank you. Precious, aren't they? They really are.
She's back in school.
Yes, she's in grad school. Yay. I saw her room on the range. It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful room. He's a great old lady. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Rubin Peacock. Born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Rubin Peacock attended what is now the North Carolina School of Arts. After receiving degrees in art from the University of Georgia and VCU, he studied sculpture in Italy and traveled extensively in Mexico and South America, pursuing a passion for Mesoamerican art. Nature is the acid that etched his aesthetic. While many of the open fields and woods, creeks and rivers so essential to his artistic growth are now part of a vanishing landscape, they continue to fertilize his imagination. Over 5 decades of making bronze sculptures, his style has ranged from hard-edged geometrical to free-form figurative and flowingly contoured abstractions. All are informed by a harmonic vision of the natural world with value components offering balance and counterbalance. In this sense, his art communicates a personal vision of permanence in the world, a world older than the earliest cave paintings, newer than the next Twitter post, and more sensational than shock-driven graffiti. These two people have very impressive resumes, so we, as usual, are in for a treat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here today. We're going to take you on a journey through historic places that inspired, influenced, or provided a space for creating works of art. For more than 50 years, Rubin Peacock has been making bronze sculptures. His attraction to this ancient material and his affinity for the past didn't come from nowhere. Growing up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Rubin hunted as a boy for ducks and rabbits. He usually returned home empty-handed, though. But he had pockets full of arrowheads. While searching the bottom land of the Yadkin River for relics, he formed a lasting bond with the natural beauty around him. With clay dug from creek beds, he made his first sculptures. You'll see evidence of this natural, organic bond even in his most recent works. These open fields and woods along the rivers were essential to his artistic growth and continue to fertilize his imagination. Over 5 decades of making bronze sculptures, his style has ranged vastly, but all are informed with that vision of the natural world that is balanced and enduring. Quality, strength, and beauty are the qualities that he found in nature, and those are the characteristics of his art.
Amongst my earliest memories were Sunday outings with my family through the mountains and Piedmont regions of North Carolina. My brothers and I enjoyed traveling in the trunk of this car, hundreds of miles. Those travels played an important part in my love of mysterious, old abandoned houses and buildings that even today I have an eye open for them. Decades later, my brother Roland and his wife Linda, who are with us today, continued to enjoy travels into the countryside of Virginia in the late 60s. Part of the fun was searching for a place where I could build a studio and a home from historic ruins. After many Sundays, we spotted this house high on the hill. I don't know where that is, but built in the 18th century. Marlborough became focus of my attention for decades. Here's what it looked like after restoration. In addition to bringing the house to life, I created a studio network of buildings to continue casting bronze sculptures. Along with the seclusion and quiet, Marlborough offered a large open space for creation of large sculptures. Before I had the technical knowledge and the money to make large bronzes, I made this large sculpture you see in the lower left-hand corner out of welded steel. It laid the groundwork for larger works.
Rubin was introduced to the endless possibilities of lost wax bronze casting while studying art at the University of Georgia. That's where he grasped the connection between this ancient material and his aesthetic values. Bronze combines strength and permanence with endless possibilities for shaping. It's the ideal medium for producing works of art that last and age beautifully. After college, Rubin joined the Peace Corps and spent 2 years in Jamaica, where his travels through South America deepened his connection to antiquity.
During my Peace Corps experiences, I had time to contemplate art. While traveling to Mexico and South America, I was able to grasp the meanings and forms of abstract art, even though the art was considered primitive. I felt connected to it. This little girl walked with me for hours, pointing out ancient idols in the mountains and cornfields of Colombia. Here you see one of my abstract bronzes from the 1970s beside the terracotta rain god.
Wherever he's been, whatever the circumstances, Rubin has found a way to continue working in bronze. For instance, during his 2 years in the Peace Corps, isolated in the mountains of Jamaica, he made a small melting furnace for casting bronze. Later, while working on his MFA at VCU, he experimented with other media, but bronze always won out as his medium of choice. Returning from the Peace Corps, Rubin received a commission by the Federal Reserve Bank in Richmond that led to long stays in Italy over several years. There, Rubin strengthened casting techniques in local foundries. In 1975, architect Minoru Yamasaki, the architect for the original Trade Center, designed a new building for the Federal Reserve, now the most iconic building of Richmond's skyline. It is blazingly contemporary, with stunning views of the historic James River. Rubin's sculpture, Canal Landscape, there on the right, abstractly mimics the movement of rippling water and riverbank trees. Its rolling contours contrast with the static linearity of the building's architecture and echo the energetic flow of the James. The Federal Reserve Commission led to others, among them one for Dogham Farm in Charles City County, a historic home on land that's been farmed since 1642.
The Federal Reserve Commission made me want to capitalize on my time I spent in Italy. After meeting with the owner of Dogham Farm, Mrs. Nell Harrison, she chose this piece from a small maquette, which I took to Italy to enlarge for the grounds at Dogham Farm. On return to the U.S., the Dogham Farm and the Federal Reserve bronzes were exhibited at the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk during the summer of 1978.
Upon returning to the U.S., Rubin continued to produce commissioned works at his foundry in King William County. He traveled to Mexico and Central America, exploring Mayan and Aztec ruins and native art. All the while he was searching for a more temperate climate than Virginia to cast new commissions. Rubin discovered a foundry owner in Sarasota, Florida, who would work with him in winter on large-scale bronzes. There he had the idea of a second home and foundry.
During my winter stays in Sarasota, I used to break for lunch on the remaining cement steps of a long-vanished house. It became a special place for me on the last week. It became a special place for me on the last week before returning to Virginia. A for sale sign appeared on the property. I couldn't resist. I bought it. The next year, I found houses that were being ready for moving for a hospital expansion. I inquired about moving one of the houses to my lot. We sealed the deal and the house was mine. In the photo to the left, you see the house moved into position on my recently acquired lot. To the right is the finished version of the house after several years of renovation. Eventually I expanded into a studio and home which served me for 40 years. The photo on the left shows the studio I built behind the house with a courtyard in between the two. To the right is the courtyard with more space for Mexican pottery and landscaping. The image to the left shows the courtyard between the rear of the house and the studio. To the right is an interior shot of the studio. All my living spaces seem to follow a common design, a courtyard connecting a studio to the main living space.
For the next several decades, Rubin toggled seasonally between Richmond and Sarasota. He designed, cast, welded, applied patinas, and oversaw the delivery and installation of large-scale bronzes up to 2,000 pounds while working from these two foundries and homes. In this photo, taken by Rubin Peacock in 1984, you can see Rubin at work on a large-scale bronze called America's Gateway. Here is the completed sculpture at America's Gateway Park in Miami. And a maquette of this piece is at the Branch Museum of Architecture and Design in Richmond. Designed by architect John Russell Pope and built in 1919, the Branch House was constructed not only as a residence, but as a showcase for the owner's art collection. You can see that Rubin's designs look comfortable in historic places. The following images are of Chelsea Plantation, built in 1709 in King William County on the shores of the Mattapony. It's the second oldest plantation in Virginia. Rubin had a bronze sculpture in the library at Chelsea. Unfortunately, we don't have an image to show you as the plantation changed hands after the death of its owner in 2017 and the bronze moved to New York.
Since Chelsea was only 17 miles down the road from my house in King William, I spent a fair amount of time there developing friendships and reinforcing my appreciation of historic places. It was one of many early American landmark houses I was deeply connected to through my art.
Carey Hill Farm in Charles City County is a picturesque time capsule that's been occupied for over 275 years. The classic 18th century frame house is decorated with colonial art and antiques, providing an environment that honors its history while setting a vintage backdrop for contemporary art.
I have a special regard for Carey Hill. Its owner, Kip Kiphart, commissioned sculptures for many years without visual requirements or the need for a maquette. I had complete artistic freedom to work within an annual budget. An artist would dream of this kind of open-ended commission. This large-scale abstract sculpture is in the lily pond on the grounds of Curry Hill in the company of a number of other of my bronzes.
Rubin's long association with historic properties was not completely concentrated in the country. In 1985, he purchased a pre-Civil War commercial building at the intersection of historic Brook Road and Broad Street in downtown Richmond. In 1985, Jackson Ward was a declining neighborhood of vacant buildings. Today, it's the center of the city's thriving arts district. Rubin has a way of being a pioneer and discovering places before others get there. Today, it's the center of this arts district. It's the place where all the artists want to be, and he's been there for 30 years before they thought of it. So he continues to maintain his apartment and studio and gallery in this unique building. You can see it's built on a diagonal to conform to a very early colonial era road. It's one that actually Cornwall took Brook Road into Richmond. If you go inside this building, it's the building right in the middle, and you can see the sharp angles. All of the walls and rooms are very sharply angled. Rubin often says that his process of renewing these old buildings parallels the creative process involved in making art.
I enjoy having my studios nearby, preferably in a courtyard a few steps from my living space. In 2018, I added an additional studio on the vacant portion of the existing roof. Located just a few steps from my main apartment, it is easy to access for spur-of-the-moment work. This is a place for drawing, sketching, painting. Often sketches provide the preliminary ideas for my sculpture.
The sculpture Lost Canyon illustrates how Rubin's art likes to travel. This bronze was created in 1983 and stood for years in front of a townhouse in Richmond's historic fan district. It blended perfectly in the front yard of this modernized early 20th century townhouse with its geometrical blocks and beams merging with an organic flowing force of nature. About 5 years ago, the owners moved and sold their considerable art collection. Lost Canyon now anchors an entrance to the celebrated mid-century modern national landmark on the James River known as the Rice House. Lost Canyon complements the stark outlines of the house designed in the early 1960s by Richard Neutra, as if it were made for the monumental modernity of the house.
Many contemporary artists work in synthetic and digital media, ignoring or playing against natural beauty. I embrace and accent the beauty of nature. It's always been at the heart of my work.
Another low-slung geometrical bronze that was commissioned for another architect-designed mid-century modern house on the James is Pentangle. It too likes to travel. Just as paintings begin with a sketch, large sculptures evolve from scale models in plaster, wax, or clay called maquettes. Beginning in the 1980s, Rubin created a series of maquettes, later commissioned as bronze sculptures by private collectors to enliven their gardens, courtyards, and interior spaces. Pentangle was commissioned from a maquette. You can see how boldly geometrical this piece is, but it seems to have sprung from the earth. That inherent organic quality is fused with geometric shapes inspired by ancient totems and stelae. It gives a sense that spirits or natural forces inhabit the piece. Pentangle lived happily on its perch on its riverside perch for 35 years. In 2017, the bronze was acquired by the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. Here you see it being moved to the museum. It's currently on loan to the Museum of the Shenandoah Valley in Winchester, where once again it is one with nature. this time in the mountains where the clouds love it.
This piece was designed in low profile to preserve the sleek modern lines of the house and not to obstruct the view of the river. In addition to aesthetic concerns, bronze comes with its own set of design and production challenges. I have to thank my brother for his crane service during some of these times, the delivery, for example.
Several years ago, Bison, a bronze that was part of Rubin's Horn series, was commissioned by the owners of Tiverton in Albemarle County. Tiverton was once part of a large dairy operation. A fire gutted the house in 1935, and it was rebuilt in the classical revival style similar to the White House.
The new owners of Tiverton had a history of cattle ranching. They wanted to bring a part of that history to their Virginia home.
Another historic building, which like Tiverton was designed to resemble the White House, is the former home of Confederate ladies, now the Pauley Center at the Virginia Museum of the Fine Arts. This magnificent limestone building provides the backdrop for Rubin's Untitled Totem, a bronze which the museum acquired in 2017. Its tall, vertical form references the tradition of Native American totems. Interestingly, Native Americans long ago occupied the grounds where this sculpture now stands, and the VMFA is very committed to informing visitors of the ancient connection between its people and the country's, between its grounds and the country's indigenous people. In 2016, a VCU doctoral student organized a boxed assortment of photographs, aging Kodachrome slides, gallery invitations, and exhibition reviews spanning half a century into a meaningful archive of Rubin's work. After years of poring over this material, it came together in a book published in 2019. VMFA now has original photos and documents in its archive, and VCU Libraries generously published an online version of the book. Anyone, anywhere in the world can access the book digitally.
Looking back over the 50 years of my collecting archival materials, it was rewarding to bring them together in an organized fashion. I've spent my life making art. It is satisfying to know that while the works themselves are scattered around the world, the record of them is preserved and available for anyone to visually access and hopefully enjoy.
As Rubin's book illustrates, the life of a bronze is often long and migratory because the inherent beauty of bronze is lasting and its beauty is universally recognized. A great example is the bronze Triad, originally commissioned for a new home overlooking the James River in Goochland. Before that, it was featured in a solo exhibition at the VMFA. After resettling in London, Triad's owner donated the piece to Wake Forest University, where it stands outside the Fine Arts Center. The maquette for this piece was sold several years ago to a collector. As it was being loaded into the trunk of his car, a small piece of the casting material sifted out after 35 years. This maquette traveled to Sarasota, where it was enlarged for a client. Then it was back on the road to exhibitions along the East Coast. It was exhibited 4 or 5 more times before it was purchased in 2015 and entered the next chapter of its life with an enthusiastic new collector.
Triad was enlarged to a 6-foot, 300-pound sculpture in the winter of 1979 in Sarasota, Florida. It was cast in 8 sections, then brought to King William County to my studio for welding and finishing. Again, my thanks to the brother for crane service to deliver this piece to Goochland.
Rubin's attraction to old houses has only deepened and accelerated with time. After the sale of his studio homes in Sarasota and King William, Rubin was searching for a space near Richmond, in his Richmond Gallery in Jackson Ward, where he could retreat from the city. In 2016, he bought a perfectly intact but woefully neglected 1924 Mediterranean revival in Richmond's Ginter Park, complete with, you won't believe it, the original zinc-lined icebox and intricate wrought iron light fixtures with bulbs, colored bulbs.
To this house, I added a 20-foot addition to the 1920s garage, which made it a perfect, clean, and uncluttered environment for waxworking, another subject. The new studio home provided a spacious lawn for the permanent installation of my extensive collection of antique Mesoamerican idols and Mexican terracotta returning from Florida.
While not actively hunting for another house or project, Rubin recently leapt at the opportunity to help save the Hunter House here in City Point. After decades of neglect, the house was threatened with demolition. The house was built in 1908 in the Dutch colonial revival style. It was built by Mary Epps, daughter of Dr. Richard Epps, probably for her brother Richard and his family. After Richard's death in 1922, his estate was in limbo for 17 years. During that time, the house was rented to a Mr. Talon and later a Mr. Woolfolk. When the estate was finally settled in 1943, Mary Epps sold it to Evelyn and Charles Hunter. Hunter owned the George's Drug Stores on Broadway and was chairman of the Hopewell School Board for many years. Charles and Evelyn had 2 children, Paige and Roy. Roy, who died in the early 90s, was in real estate, and he struck a deal with the government for the purchase of the house in 1985. Evelyn, who had a life estate in the house, remained until 1993, when the National Park Service took control of the property. It was largely vacant for decades after Evelyn Hunter's departure.
City Point captured my imagination since I started visiting Roland and Linda in Hopewell 35 years ago. When the opportunity to ensure the survival of the Hunter House came my way, I jumped at the chance. The rear of the Hunter House overlooks the Appomattox River, just as my brother's house does several blocks away. We're literally around the bend in the river from one another. When I bought the house, it was probably popularly known as the Adderholt Hunter House, yet the Adderholt name never appears in the chain of title. After puzzling over their connection to the house, I stumbled upon a plausible explanation. From what I understand, the Adderholts were in the concrete curbing business in Hopewell in the early 20th century. Having studied the concrete foundation walls in the basement and the exterior surface bricks, I've surmised that the Adderholts probably played some part in the construction of the house. It was a puzzlement to me why the exterior bricks appeared to have always been painted, but when I pulled out one of the bricks, I could see that it was made of concrete, a very high-tech product at the time. But it would have been necessary to require painting to avoid water absorption. I'd love to hear other thoughts about this, but it certainly explains for me a possible Adderholt connection. While working on the house several weeks ago, I had a surprise visit from Paige Hunter Allen, daughter of Charles and Evelyn. She loved growing up in the house and brought her daughter and grandchildren from Idaho to see it and to reminisce. Before arriving, they wondered if the house would still be standing. It was so exciting for me to learn firsthand about how the Hunters lived in the house, how it functioned, and the alterations that were made. It was a very special connection for all of us who have an abiding love of the house. I'm honored to play a part in its preservation and its history.
I hope we've made it clear that art is a journey. We hope you've enjoyed the historic places where Rubin's work has led us today. Thank you.